Hey guys, welcome to another week of Tech Talk. Juicy Mike, what are we talking about today?
Juicy Mike, eh? Okay, so we do have a bit of a guest with us today. We've got Tim on board today, so always great to have Tim with us. And I think the subject's been brought to the table today is adjustable weights, or weights in general on machinery. I didn't just say weights. It's not, you haven't tuned into an episode of The Biggest Loser. We are talking about weights on machinery. There are, there's obviously different sorts of weights and adjustments depending on the type of machinery and that sort of thing. But it's certainly something that's become a bit more prevalent, to my understanding, in more recent years. Never used to be such a thing. But yeah, this is one of course, I'm always interested in our topics, but this one definitely, I'd like to learn a bit more of the history and some good do's and don'ts and other aspects. Would you like to take it away, Tim, and elaborate a bit more?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Mike. Look, I would say, having been in the industry since the mid-90s and when these larger commercial machines started coming to the marketplace, pretty much, what the contractor was working with was the weight of the machine. There were a couple of units out there in the marketplace that had like a removable horseshoe weight that sat around the top of the chassis around the motor. Some of the HTC Classics had it there for a bit, and some of the old Tornado machines going way back. But essentially, the trend pretty much was you use the weight that was actually built into the machine. And there wasn't a variation in downward pressure. It was predominantly change in speed and obviously change in direction once that became a feature of machines. And the contractor was pretty much, always made to, if they needed to change something, because the grinding weight or pressure wasn't adjustable, and we know that grinding is very much a combination of power and weight and grinding pressure. The only change that was really available in the contractor's bag was speed, direction, and what type of tooling they're using under the machine, whether that be bond, whether that be number of segments, whether that be grit, whatever it happens to be. Of course, as you mentioned now, a lot of the machines these days are coming out with weights that can sort of swing forward, swing sideways, sort of three different positions: full down, full up, or full back. So it gives another option in the scope of influencing the grinding environment under the machine to the contractor. So I guess the question that we probably want to talk about is, what are the use of these weights and really how they should be approached? Keen to hear particularly comments from Milan and Josh on that. But I guess from my experience and as a contractor, weight was always something that you would use once you had a tool working properly, as opposed to try and get a tool working properly. And that principle kind of goes true for whether you've got variable weight or not. You've got to get a tool working properly, and then adjusting the weight, or particularly addition of weight, is more a form of optimizing or being able to accelerate the productivity of a particular tool rather than to get it going. I think if I can sort of summarise the sorts of things that I hear a lot of you guys talking about with your customers and tech talks in the past, is that we're very much led by what the tool's telling us. And, that's temperature, that's the appearance of the face of the tool, what sort of stress it seems to be under. Generally, tools that aren't working that well are not going to benefit by loading them up with more and more weight. So keen to hear from Milan and Josh. My personal approach is, let's get the tool working properly and then use the weight for optimizing it, rather than trying to get it or encourage it to work. But maybe there's some environments or applications where there is exceptions to that rule, and different perspectives from you guys.
Don't worry about Josh and Milan, Tim. I've just got a very quick question in between. But you mentioned tooling. Now, I just wanted to ask, is this something that is predominantly during the metals grinding stage or the polishing stage, or can it be over the whole spread?
Great question. And yes, definitely we're talking about probably very much so in the metals is probably where it's the most sensitive to weight and change of weight, but certainly in resins, there's a big factor. We know that there's sort of sweet spots as far as pressure is concerned for the resins in particular. So being able to govern either to increase the pressure or decrease the pressure to get that optimum sort of kilos per pad is definitely a useful thing to have as well. Probably my comments were more directed at the metals, because that tends to be where people want to really load up or fix a problem that they're having with the tool not working so well.
I guess coming from that HTC machinery usage background, obviously I used the weight kit on a HTC machine. At the times that I used, generally the weights were forward. And that's, if the tool's not working with the weights forward, there's no reason I'd put them back. I just look for a new tool. The only time I would shift the weights back would be if there was, you're working on a really, really soft slab and maybe it's overloading the 11 kilowatt motor, let's say on the 650, or you're putting there's a lot of friction underneath the machine when you're using tempos or buffing pads, something like that, and you get the red overload light come out. That's when you need to adjust the weights. But for me, if I have the weights forward, that's the optimal position to be grinding in. But yeah, other than that, I don't know. It's not much use running them back. What would you say, Josh?
Oh, look, I always thought those big, heavy, dangerous swinging weights were just to get your customers to pay their bills. Here, put your hand here if you're not going to pay the bill.
Wow. I don't know you anything at the moment, do I, Josh? I think we're all pretty good.
Interesting how none of these machines are made in France.
The only time, particularly for metals, I can't see it being an advantage, because that's all a power to weight game, and the machines that the weights have traditionally been on have been underpowered from the factory. So I never understood why putting extra weights on there or having the capacity for extra weight while grinding would make any sense, because you can never get them to cut at full power with the weights in middle or neutral anyhow. So, but go to the next stage, talk about resins. I could see it being an advantage because it doesn't take a lot of horsepower to run the resins. If you've got additional RPM that's not being used, but you can put more weight on the machine, which may mean that you have the capacity still under there to fit an extra resin underneath. That means that you could actually increase your wheel speed, because per revolution you've got another 3 inches of resin under there working. So getting the optimal down pressure and increasing the RPM just means that you'll be able to finish up that floor faster than the weights in neutral or not having weights at all and being hamstrung by having a set weight. But that also means that you've got to have the I guess the additional RPM available to you as well to make that worth it. Look, even if you don't have the available RPM, increasing the weight, if you can increase the working surface area under the machine, also makes sense. So that could be an advantage, only if you can take advantage of it.
So just to summarise that, Josh, if in let's call it some numbers. Let's just say a resin pad is, preferred range is sort of around the 25 kilogram mark, right? And you've got a spare 250 kilos, let's say, that you can dump down on your machine, which means you could actually put 10 more pads under the machine without reducing the weight on the other ones, okay? So you're basically saying you've got 10 more pads or 10 more cutting surfaces that are working under the machine, which should all be translating scratches to the floor, which essentially is productivity. However, if you put those 10 pads under it and now we've reduced everything down to 10 to 15 kilos a pad, we've actually gone backwards from a productivity point of view.
There are some advantages there if you've got the actual surface area to load up.
Perhaps one of my favorite shows is called Mythbusters. So maybe you can bust a myth, a bit of a mouthful there, bust a myth. So when I was starting out, the message was, if you're using resins, you have to have your weights back. Do you know where that came from? Or was it, that's it. Your home stretch, you're like, I'm almost done, weights back. What's the deal with that?
Look, we know that it's a pretty technical craft, the grinding and polishing. And look, in the early days, it was a very hard industry to scale because there wasn't a lot of skilled labour around and people that had experience. So my only presumption with something like that is the manufacturer kind of knew the sorts of things that we're talking about with regards to whatever resin pads or tooling they were running at the time. Basically, for most applications, the optimal range for that pad was going to be with the weights back, and it was just easier to make a rule of thumb rather than to try and educate the market and because it's a slow way of being able to scale an industry. So I would just think there's a lot of general rules of thumbs back in the early days because there was just such little technical understanding and depth in the marketplace. So you've got to start somewhere, and often it starts in those ways.
That's about all we've got time for. We've been on this for more than 10 minutes.
Well, that's good because I've been waiting for a beer. You guys have got to come up with some of these puns because it always seems like me who's angling to go for a beer. So
I've got the weight for opening stubborn beers. They've all lost thumbs. Their thumbs are all gone.
No, very good topic. A little bit of a different one, one that we haven't touched on before. So that's nice to get that out there. Again, as we always say, any feedback or direct contact that's needed, please feel free to give us a shout. Yeah, good one, guys. Let's go and enjoy our weekend and keep up the good work out there, as Josh quite often says. And it is, and you do say, Josh, about seeing, and Milan, about seeing good work out there and things like that. And we're still seeing all that, and I guess appreciating more and more.
Good work, everyone.
Enjoy the weekend, guys.
See you later. Thanks, guys.
The meeting winning. That's the one.
That's all the credit we have left.
Let's do it. Let's go.
Let's put more money into this thing.